I'm going to bring a different perspective to this, although somewhat similar to John's, in that I spent 8 years with Institutional Shareholder Services, and I ran the research group there that did all the proxy analysis that many of you have seen over the years. I did leave there in 1998, so I can't take any of the heat for what's going on in terms of their policies and principles now. I've spent the last 8.5 years with NACD, so I'm kind of on the other side of the fence, went from the shareholders to the directors, and looking at that adversarial relationship that John has so eloquently described. We, at NACD about 1.5 years ago, set out to move boards away from the box-ticking forms of governance that we've seen so adamantly pushed over the last several years from a variety of advisors, including groups like ISS, and wanted to go towards more of a principles-based governance structure. We went out and teamed with the Council of Institutional Investors, the ICGN, the Business Roundtable, and we brought the director's perspective. So we really looked at all three angles of the triangle, if you want to look at it in that formation, to get the boundaries of where we agreed. Now, again, this was 1.5 years ago, and we boiled all of the policy statements down of all these different groups and came up with 10 key principles of where we felt that the shareholders, management, and the board all agreed about governance. And there's nothing earth-shattering in this revelation, except for the fact that we agreed on more things than we disagreed on. And you're free to go out on our website and look at what the 10 principles are, but they are things like the board has to have structures and practices designed to position itself to fulfill the duties effectively and efficiently. There needs to be transparency. We need to have director competency and commitment to the organization. There needs to be board accountability and objectivity. Need independent board leadership in whatever form that may come in. Integrity, ethics, and responsibility that Ben so eloquently referred to. Attention to information, agenda, and strategy when looking at governance. Protection against board entrenchment so that the board can constantly refresh itself, and shareholder input into director selection. Now that became somewhat of a tenuous conversation, as you might imagine, between the shareholders, the directors, and the management team. What we're suggesting is that there needs to be more dialogue between the shareholder groups and management about the director candidates that are put in place. Believe me, I'm probably the last person that would advocate proxy access. I do not believe in its current state it is formatted correctly to provide any benefit. What I do think is needed is a more open dialogue between the shareholders and management to put forth suitable candidates that can run through the governance committee of the board to make sure that their skill sets align with the rest of the board and the strategy of the company. And again, greater shareholder communication was the 10th piece of this. We introduced this at our annual conference in October of 2008, right after we had seen the beginnings of the meltdown, the September fallout of the market. So we had a tremendous economic shift between when we started this project and when we ended it, which I'm sure is what happened also with the CED project that we're now talking about, as they started this long before the economics shifted. I do believe that the recommendations in this report are outstanding, and I think they're well-timed. But what we faced in introducing the 10 principles was, how do we move this into action, as Judy said at the onset? And we thought, well, we're going to take a real hard look at 4 key issues within those 10 principles, and how do boards react to those things. And the 4 key issues that we looked at were strategy, risk, executive compensation, and transparency. And we've been preparing over the last 4 or 5 months a series of white papers on each one of those things. It was very interesting for me, having been at NACD through the development of most of our Blue Ribbon Commission reports, to go back and look at what we said around those 4 issues. The strategy Blue Ribbon Commission report was actually done before I arrived in 1999. The risk was one of my first in 2002. We did executive compensation twice, once in 1994 and again in 2003. And transparency, I'll relate strictly to the commission that John participated in on board shareholder communications, which we just completed. It was fascinating to go back and look at what we said. Because I came to much the same conclusion that Mr. Donaldson came to when referring to this report, that if people had listened to what we said back in 99, in 2002, in 94, and again in 2003, around these key issues that are facing boards and how do we move this into action around strategy. The flip side of RADIT strategy is risk, obviously. Executive compensation and the problems that we're seeing now with the executive compensation system, and transparency. Again, how do we communicate the key messages to our shareholders, sometimes on a proactive basis, sometimes through management, but involving the board in this policy decision that boards need to have. It is a fascinating exercise. We then took that out on the road and got feedback from the director community across the country through our chapter system. We did several programming, electronic programming venues at NACD to include as many people as we possibly could, and we're about to publish these white papers as well. But one of the things I'll refer back to, because I know my time is about out, and it kept coming up through the report as I read through it, was this notion of balance, and how do we create this balance between performance and the public goals that are out there. And I do think this is essential. I think it is wrapped into the strategy of the company. I think it is wrapped into the risks that the company needs to identify, whether it is the board and the management team, or most of these come up through the management team themselves and get vetted by the board. And how do we create this balance that is so essential to moving the ball forward? Because I think unless we move the ball forward, we do have this adversarial relationship that we're both fighting and constantly fighting between the shareholders and the board, and the performance of the company cannot move forward if that's the case.